romance novel. Chapter 1. When she entered the room, there was magic. Joe Valentino felt the enchantment all around him. He stared in rapt fascination at the ebony beauty gliding splendidly in the direction of his table. She had a graceful way of moving that brought excitement to his loins. It was an exhilarating rush that he had never experienced before. Not with any woman. Not with Stephanie. "Joe," Lucina whispered, noticeably embarrassed. "What, damn it?" Joe snapped, irritated by the intrusion. He jerked around to face Lucino at the precise moment the maitre d' deposited the woman at their table. "Mr. Valentino? Mr. Caporelli?" the stranger asked tentatively, looking from one to the other. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the two of you. Michael Langston will not be attending this morning's meeting after all, and has appointed me to act on his behalf. I'm Leslie Grayson," the tall, elegant woman said. Then she extended a petite brown hand to Joe. Her handshake was soft and warm, while Joe Valentino's palms sweated profusely. "Lucino Caporelli?" Larry's attorney sensed Joe's curiosity and surprise and coughed nervously. They exchanged startled looks, but spontaneously stood up in polite respect. Leslie delighted in the tense, strained expression etched on both their faces. "The two of you seem surprised," she offered. "Quite frankly, I am very surprised," Lucina blurted out. That is, we were expecting a man, perhaps?" she questioned. "I'm used to the somewhat awkward reaction." "My name does seem to do that," she laughed airily. "However, I can assure you that once the initial shock has worn off, I usually get along quite well with my associates. I'm sure that will be the same circumstances this morning," she said pleasantly. Lucino smiled a tight smile and then sat back down. Joe, on the other hand, was not so courteous, openly offended and admittedly surprised by the fact that he, Joe Valentino, had allowed himself to be fooled by a woman, merely stared at her almost without speaking. Running his fingers through his hair, Joe silently reprimanded himself for such a foolish oversight. He expected and even prepared for a much older male, but the Leslie Grayson seated across from him was without question female, young and beautiful and black. When he had composed himself and given the situation a moment of scrupulous review, Joe had to throw his head back and let out a hearty laugh at his own stupidity. It never occurred to him that Leslie Grayson could be anything other than an old white male of the sort he was used to dealing with. However, Leslie Grayson was a fool indeed if she thought for a moment that his attempt to purchase Sphinx would suffer because of the minor inconvenience of her surprising appearance. A sly smile played at his lips as he charted his next course of action. "This will be easy," he thought. But trying to think of a new battle strategy did not come easily. Joe's mind was immobilized by the presence of Leslie's exotic beauty, and as much as he argued with himself, he could not deny the fact that his concentration was sidetracked by the woman. His adversary possessed an almost haunting loveliness that held him spellbound. He was finding it difficult to even turn away from her mystical, jet-black, deeply set eyes. "Damn," he cursed softly as he shifted in his seat. "May I order you coffee, Miss Grayson?" Lucino asked, hoping that would draw Joe into conversation away from his blatant lust. But by now, Leslie had already grown impatient of the timeless silence and was eager to begin the meeting. "Thank you, no," she replied. "Mr. Caporelli, Mr. Valentino, why don't we get right to the point? I don't want to be presumptuous, but I do feel it's necessary to clarify one small element before we approach the issue at hand. The sound of her husky, cultured voice rang like musical harps to Joe's ears. He watched the motion of her lips as she spoke and longed for the taste of their fullness. He noticed the silkiness of her skin teasing at the bodice of her blouse. The only reason, and I must emphasize, the only reason that I had our secretary contact you, Mr. Caporelli, was to afford us the opportunity to meet you personally and to try to reach an amicable agreement between our organizations. As Mr. Valentino's attorney, I have of course advised him of the importance of coming to terms in a timely, non-combative fashion, Miss Grayson. Lucchino began graciously. We have gone over every detail, and we are ready to make an excellent offer. I think you'll find, But Leslie almost hostilely stopped Lucchino in mid-sentence. Mr. Caporelli, I am not ignorant to the fact the two of you were expecting Mr. Langston to feel flattered to have you offer to expand his Finks chain. But contrary to what you believe, she directed at Joe, Finks is not for sale. Mr. Langston is satisfied with his current property holdings. You are aware that my employer owns all of the real estate around the Finks building for 3 city blocks? So you see, he has no desire or need for your millions. Lucchino and Joe were momentarily surprised at the woman who had shocked them first by her mere appearance and now by the spunk evident in her manner. They were prepared for her to balk at the first offer, had counted on it in fact, but they were not prepared for outright rejection. Joe, who had been watching Leslie the entire time, grew more intrigued. He shifted in his seat. Joe couldn't help but notice that with all her beauty, there was a feeling of yearning about Leslie Grayson, edged with a remote coolness. And yet, at the same time, he thought he detected a smoldering passion that lay somewhere between the two. Impulsively, he stood up. Leslie held her breath. She watched him move around the table to position himself directly behind her. Leslie waited, but what she wasn't sure because Joe simply stood there, rigidly still, without touching her or even flinching. He stared down at her for a prolonged moment, and somehow he managed to stifle the burning desire to give her a long, deep, lingering kiss on her neck. Indeed, after what seemed forever, he spoke to Leslie for the first time since she'd sat down to their table. You will therefore learn very quickly, Miss Grayson, that Mr. Langston's resistance will prove costly. His voice came out all silky and smooth, and for a second caused her to shiver. His hands were gripping the back of her chair, and she could feel the heat of them against her blouse. His breath was warm against the nape of her neck. For a moment she was on fire. But then she got angry. Joe Valentino was trying to intimidate her into selling Finks, trying to take advantage of her being a woman. But was there danger in his words too? Leslie tightened her lips and tried to appear indifferent to his questionable threat. But with him leaning over her so closely, his warm breath softly caressing the nape of her neck, she couldn't think of a strong enough response. So she pushed her chair backwards, crashing into his muscular legs. The action startled him and forced him to return to his own seat in mild, discomforting pain. But there was a wicked smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Well now, Mr. Valentino, Leslie said in a peculiar tone, I think we understand one another. If you think Mr. Langston or I could be threatened by you, then I must tell you that you take too much for granted. I will personally inform him of your... Threaten you? Joe drawled lazily, his thick eyebrow raised in question. Oh, please. You take too much for granted, Miss Grayson. I'm not threatening you. I am merely offering you a bit of precious advice, he said, his eyes twinkling.